Springs.
Good evening. Thank you for joining us tonight. I'm Gino Lamont.
And I'm Sarah Sanchez. We begin with serious questions about policing in America. We talked to local leaders on the issue that's sweeping across the U.S., including Minneapolis, where the city council has called for the police department to be dismantled. The president sharply opposes these calls, tweeting, "Law and order, not defund and abolish the police." Plus, schools in the state release a roadmap to reopening in California, and we'll look at the possible rise of coronavirus cases after thousands of people protest for a 14th day in a row.
Let's begin on Capitol Hill. Democrats from the House and Senate kneel silently for 8 minutes and 46 seconds, the length of time Minneapolis police officer pinned George Floyd's neck under his knee. Lawmakers then unveil new policy reform legislation, including bans on chokeholds and no-knock warrants, and a national database to track police misconduct.
A majority of the Minneapolis City Council is pledging to dismantle the police department and recreate public safety systems. 9 of the 13 city council members publicized their desire Sunday to not reform MPD, but abolish it. The mayor of Minneapolis says he supports overhauling the department, but not abolishing it. While other U.S. cities aren't taking steps quite as extreme as Minneapolis, there's still several calls to defund the police. And some of those cities are already making changes to their departments. But what does this movement actually mean? Our Olivia Sandusky joins us now in Indio with more. Olivia.
Sarah, there's an important distinction there between dismantling and defunding, which is what these protesters are calling for, to maybe move some of that money into other areas in the community. I spoke to the Indio City Council today, as well as the police department, to get their reaction on this movement. Across the country, some activists are pushing to defund police departments. And while the message faces opposition, supporters say the intent is to reform and not abolish law enforcement.
I don't believe that you should disband police departments, but I do think that in cities, in states, we need to look at how we are spending the resources and invest more in our communities.
The American Civil Liberties Union is calling for portions of law enforcement funds to be shifted to support mental health and housing programs. And now local city leaders are assessing their own agencies.
Makes us go back and reflect what are we doing in our own police departments and our own practices of use of force, de-escalation techniques, productive ways to allocate our funding.
Councilman Furman says he's working closely with Indio Police to create a cultural change. And members of the department say their funds are allocated based on community input.
I think we just look to make sure is what is the level of service that the city expects? What does the public would like to see? Is it our public safety? Is it and things to help the community in its social services, its public services?
And while national events have divided officers and civilians, Indio leaders say their goal is to create unity while searching for a solution.
The message here is we're going to have to continue to work together.
Because at the end of the day, the city police department for Indio is the citizens' police department. It's the businesses' police department. So I think we can't lose sight of that. It's not just us. It's the entire community.
And Councilman Furman told me that for the community, the best way to give your input, whether that's about the police department or the funds that we've been discussing tonight, is to show up to a city council meeting or even join them virtually right now. And they do that the first and third Wednesday of every month. Reporting live in Indio, Olivia Sandusky, NBC Palm Springs.
All right, thank you, Olivia. On the same day, conversations of police funding is heating up. Thousands of people in Texas line up to pay their respect to George Floyd before a private funeral, which will be held tomorrow. Wendy Woolfolk has more on that.
The poignant public goodbye to a man whose death has gripped our nation. Thousands, including Texas Governor Greg Abbott, paying their respects to George Floyd.
George Floyd has not died in vain. His life will be a living legacy.
Most never knew him, but touched by his story.
So even though we don't know them, we still stand with them.
Hallelujah, hallelujah. For hours they come, all wearing masks and observing social distance measures while moving through the sanctuary to pause in solidarity. A bittersweet return to Floyd's childhood home of Houston, flanked by other families of those also shot and killed by police. His brother remembers the high school football star as the father they never had.
He's the gentle giant
And he had his life taken away when he shouldn't have been. He should have been here speaking on somebody else's behalf.
In Minneapolis today, a judge set bail at $1 million for Derek Chauvin, the former officer seen in that now infamous video.
It's not enough for those cops just to be charged, but we need a conviction. We need to show people that, hey, look, no one is above the law.
Now, after 2 weeks of heartbreak and a country seemingly torn by protest.
I tell you what, if he was told he would have to sacrifice his life to bring the world together, and I knowing him, by knowing he would have did it.
A hope shared across the nation. Wendy Woolfolk, NBC News.
All right. After tomorrow's private funeral service, George Floyd will be laid to rest beside his mother in Pearland, Texas. The next hearing date for Derek Chauvin is set for June 29th.
Protests against police brutality continue in the Coachella Valley, this time in Desert Hot Springs. About a dozen demonstrators showed up as early as 9 this morning. The Coachella Valley has seen largely peaceful demonstrations for over a week now. The largest protest thus far happened at Ruth Hardy Park in Palm Springs. Over 1,000 people turned out for the Enough is Enough protest Saturday, organized by the Young Justice Advocates. The protest included a series of speakers who delivered powerful messages to a crowd that was eager to listen.
This protest is not to degrade the police officers or call out any race. We are here for unity and equality of our country. We are here to show our pain.
So today, here is the challenge for us. Protest is not just signs and marches. Protest means taking action to speak up against something that's not quite right.
Don't weaponize your white privilege, hand feed me scraps of sustenance, and tell me this is justice.
And as long as black life doesn't matter, no one can be free. Thank you.
Joining the list of speakers at the event was Congressman Dr. Raul Ruiz.
I can't breathe.
Come on, boys.
I can't breathe. Mommy, I'm through. Those words have shook us to our core. Those words have pierced our moral conscience. Those words have moved us with hope for action.
A person who attended last week's protest in Palm Desert 7 days ago now claims they are coronavirus positive. In a post on Twitter, a local person says they were at that Palm Desert protest with someone who tested positive for the virus. The person who made this post said they're waiting to hear if they're positive as well. Hundreds, if not more than 1,000 people showed up to that demonstration. Reminder to anyone protesting, make sure you get tested.
Right now, firefighters are battling nearly a dozen different fires up and down the state, including this one, the equestrian fire in Castaic. It's burned about 75 acres so far, and strong Santa Ana winds are not helping the firefighters. That fire tripled in size in 3 hours this morning, and of course, no word yet on what caused it.
We're taking a live look now from our Agua Caliente Casino cam in Rancho Mirage. Gorgeous blue sky out there after a very windy weekend. NBC Palm Springs Chief Meteorologist Mike Everett is looking ahead. He's not looking towards the weekend.
You know what? The weekend is actually going to be great. We'll cut to the chase there. We've got a little bit of work to do in between now and then. We've got building high pressure across Southern California. Thus, all of the dryness and the gusty winds that thankfully now are switching around from the northwest and north as we saw this weekend. We were a wind tunnel. Wind advisory has now been allowed to expire. And some good-ish news, at least as far as we're concerned. We're seeing that wind now shifting around towards the northeast and even the east up in the mountains there. What that does for us is slows those winds down. The San Bernardinos and the Little San Bernardinos will do a great job of blocking us and taking those winds from gusty just down to breezy. Meanwhile, along and west of the mountains, when you get that easterly flow, that dries them out and it also warms things up along the coast. Some forecasts this week are calling for some 90s and even some low 100s in Orange County this week. That's the classic signature of the Santa Ana pattern. And of course, it's going to keep those fire conditions elevated as well. Looks like that will peak for us on Thursday, and then we're going to bring things back down again next weekend. Take a look at current radar right now. One of the hallmarks of high pressure is the lack of moisture in the atmosphere. Not even seeing those clouds out on the horizon right now. But what we are seeing are those advisories along the coast. You take a look at this down towards San Diego County and Orange County. They have a heat advisory in place this week. They will actually be warmer than we will in some instances. We'll talk about that more in the full forecast. 91 degrees, well below average outside right now, and those winds are starting to back off. It is very dry out there, 5% humidity, but here comes the next 3 days. Average on Tuesday, heating up Wednesday and Thursday. Yep, we're going to go back into that range again. But as I mentioned, this story has a happy ending, and I'll tell it to you coming up.
All right, thank you, Mike. Across the country, the number of COVID-19 cases has overall dropped, but there is an alarming trend. At least 20 states have seen an uptick in recent weeks, including us right here in California.
Yeah, let's take a look at our local numbers. Keep in mind, the county has stopped updating numbers on the weekend, so these are from Friday on. 429 new cases were reported countywide, 192 of those in our valley, bringing our total to over 2,100. Only one new death reported in the county, but none in the Coachella Valley. Over 5,300 people have recovered countywide. And that city-by-city breakdown of cases, Indio has the most, big jump at 566. Palm Desert has the most deaths now with 26.
Palm Springs Unified School District announces an earlier than normal start date. Classes will now begin August 5th. The California Department of Education released a document that will act as a roadmap on how schools can reopen safely. This upcoming year is going to be a little different than what we've seen before, and our Daytona Everett joins us now live to explain exactly how it's going to work. Daytona, good afternoon.
Hey, Gino, yeah, it's going to be face masks. It's going to be social distancing and distance learning. These are all the guidelines they were talking about today. And as of right now, they are recommendations, so all the counties and schools can kind of adjust them for themselves. But Palm Valley School, where I am right now, is going to implement a lot of those guidelines, but they're going to put their own twist on it, too. Preparations for the school year are starting much earlier than usual for Dr. Sherman, head of Palm Valley, a private school in Rancho Mirage.
We have to rethink some of our aspects of our curriculum.
It's not just about buying supplies and creating student schedules. It's about figuring out how to keep COVID-19 from entering their campus.
One of the special things about our campus is all of our classrooms have external exit and entry doors,
which will help with social distancing, one of the many guidelines presented by the California Department of Education. Other recommendations include wearing masks, taking temperatures, altered scheduling with some students on campus for certain days of the week and others distance learning from home, and more. Dr. Sherman is taking it a step further.
We're going to have webcams in each classroom that will synchronously provide instructional delivery for those families that don't feel comfortable yet coming onto campus.
So I have a little area with my windows.
Ava, who will be a 7th grader at Palm Valley next year, spent the end of 6th grade doing classes from home.
So it's like we're in a world textbook, with everything that went on this year.
She says she's ready for school even though it won't look the same.
I'm happy to at least see their faces because it's so hard without seeing your friends.
Still, the situation is fluid with the possibility of a second coronavirus spike.
We have to prepare for the likelihood that we could have to return to distance learning.
A possibility that Dr. Sherman sees as an opportunity
to come up with a hybrid online model. I think that's going to be very popular in the near term.
Now, we reached out to all of our local public school districts as well, and they said that they are taking a look at those guidelines a little bit closer, and we'll definitely try to implement some of those. You can find those full responses on our website, NBCPalmSprings.com. You can also find that full document with all of the guidelines from the department in California. Reporting live from Rancho Mirage, I'm Daytona Everett.
Thank you, Daytona. Coming up at 6:30, we continue our coverage on coronavirus in the Coachella Valley. Facts Not Fear, the most comprehensive local newscast dedicated to giving you the very latest regarding COVID-19 in our community. You don't want to miss it. It's coming up at 6:30.
But coming up next, the White House holds a press briefing today to address the issue of defunding police, and the press secretary calls out LA and New York for supporting the movement. And we're going to check in with former Vice President and presumptive Democratic presidential candidate Joe Biden. He took a trip to Houston to pay his respect to the Floyd family today.
Plus, we'll take a look at the latest polls pitting President Trump a couple points behind Biden. And a few signs summer travel is making a big comeback. Details on just how many people are taking trips. Stay with us.
Tonight, the attorney for one of the former officers charged in the death of George Floyd will tell us why he'll ask for the case to be dismissed. Plus, we'll take a closer look into controversial proposals to defund police departments on NBC Nightly News.
As the White House press briefing gets underway, President Trump holds a roundtable with members of law enforcement from across the nation. Much of today's briefing focused on the growing call to defund and dismantle police departments. There was strong focus on the president's opposition to taking away police funding.
Let's be clear. The mayor of LA wants to defund police, take money away from police. Mayor de Blasio, the mayor of New York, wants to take money away from police. That means cutting of police. That means reducing police departments. That means defunding police departments, if not getting rid of them entirely. No, he does not agree with that. And the rest of America does not agree with that.
The White House says the president is looking at a variety of proposals to deal with policing issues, but would not comment on specifics.
The campaign for former Vice President Joe Biden says he does not want to defund police either. The candidate traveled to Houston to pay his respects to the Floyd family. According to a tweet from Floyd family attorney, Biden met privately with the family for more than an hour.
8 in 10 American voters believe things are, quote, out of control in the U.S. According to an NBC Wall Street Journal poll, Joe Biden maintains a national lead over President Trump by 7 points.
Tropical storm Cristobal made landfall this weekend in southeast Louisiana. It's now downgraded to a tropical depression. New Orleans put out a voluntary evacuation order for areas outside the levee system. Roads were inundated with water, making it difficult to travel, but all in all, the levees worked as they're supposed to work.
And with that, we're going to check in with Mike with a look at our own forecast when we come back. Mike.
Hi, Sarah. I'm tracking Cristobal, and it's going to take a very unusual pattern now that it's made landfall. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about some blue skies and some heat making its way into Southern California when we come back. Welcome back. Well, that was a bit of a bittersweet weekend, wasn't it? We had temperatures well below average. You know what? I opened the windows last night. Got a little bit of a wind tunnel going through the house, but that was the trade-off. It was very gusty this weekend. A lot of particulate matter in the air. As you're noticing right now, things starting to mellow out. We're getting the best of both worlds. Beautiful blue skies out there. Still breezy, but not gusty, and the wind advisories have been allowed to expire. Let's take a look at what's happening in the big picture. The roller coaster ride continues. High pressure will once again rebuild across Southern California, and yes, we will warm up this week. Not to the extent that we have during the last 4 heat waves. I don't think we'll hit 110, but we'll get pretty close. Meanwhile, there is a storm system punching into the Pacific Northwest. Everything across the Southwest is warm and dry, and that's going to translate to some very warm temperatures along the coast. We'll talk about that in a moment. Jet stream will ease off a little bit. We'll move a little bit further up towards the north, and that will keep things dry for us, take things cooler up towards the north and west, keep things cool across the midsection of the country, and keep things very wet. Look at that. That's crystal ball. It's expected to move up into the Great Lakes region. Normally these things hook a hard right and head off into the Atlantic. So here's what Futurecast holds for folks up along the Mississippi River Valley, up into places like Wisconsin and Minnesota. That's not normally where we track tropical depressions, but that's where it's going, over top of the Great Lakes up into Canada, and then finally turning around and heading out into the Atlantic. Meanwhile, things are unusually cool across the Intermountain West. Snow is falling in the Colorado mountains. I got some great pictures from Utah earlier today where folks are powder skiing up there, although they are having to climb to do it because there's no chairlifts that will take them there. Here's what we're looking at as far as severe weather goes. We are tracking thunderstorm warnings all the way up again into places like Minnesota and the Dakotas. Very wet along the eastern edge of Colorado. Meanwhile, very dry down towards New Mexico and into parts of Arizona. And then look at that swath right there. That is where all the rain is expected from Cristobal. Meanwhile, things will remain relatively quiet along the East Coast and dry and warm for us here. Speaking of which, temperatures well below average today. 100 is the average for today's date. We got up to about 92. Things are warm along the coast, but will get even warmer. As I mentioned, some spots in inland Orange County could hit 100 degrees tomorrow. Meanwhile, we'll be in the upper 90s and lower 100s. That's exactly where we're supposed to be. We'll get some onshore and some offshore flow. Heat advisories in place in Orange County. Heat advisories in place down towards San Diego. Not for us, though. 92 is what we got today, well below average. Look at that. 80s and 90s out there tonight, and you'll get to open your window again. Low 70s is where we get to in the middle of the night. Upper 60s is where we start on Tuesday. Low dew points, though. It's going to be very dry out there. Expect upper 90s and lower 100s on Tuesday. And then here comes the heat. Your Comfort Air 7-day forecast shows us peaking at 109 on Thursday. But look, another system moves in just in time for the weekend. It takes us back down to the low 100s.
Well, air travel is certainly on its way back up. This weekend was the busiest air travel weekend since the start of the pandemic, as more than 400,000 people were screened by TSA Friday through Sunday. One possible reason, the Pentagon just lifted travel restrictions to 39 states and 5 countries. And oh yeah, by the way, it's June. Of course, we're back to traveling. Airbnb is making a comeback. The company says it saw more U.S. bookings between May 17th and June 3rd than the same time period a year earlier. Crazy, which includes Memorial Day. Despite the increase, though, the CEO says he expects this year's revenue to be half of what it was last year. We'll be right back. Stay with us. That'll do it for us here at 5. We'll see you back here at 6 after NBC Nightly News.